Sign or get out, my wife mocked, waving the divorce papers while sitting on her lover's lap in the house I had paid for alone. She smiled as if throwing me out would destroy me. I signed, but the next morning her lawyer screamed, "Do you have any idea what you just did? I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm Paul, and at 62 years old I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong." The front door of our house, the house I'd been paying for alone for 15 years, stood slightly ajar when I pulled into the driveway that Thursday evening. Something felt off immediately. Riley's car was there, but so was a sleek black BMW I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened as I walked up the path, my work boots heavy against the stone steps. The sound hit me first. Laughter, Riley's laugh, but different somehow, lighter, more carefree than I'd heard in years. Then a man's voice, deep and unfamiliar, saying something I couldn't quite make out. My hand froze on the doorknob as reality crashed over me like ice water. I pushed the door open slowly, hoping I was wrong, praying this was some innocent explanation my mind hadn't considered. But there they were, in my living room, on my couch. Riley was perched on this stranger's lap like she belonged there, her arms draped around his neck, both of them laughing at something on his phone. They didn't even notice me at first. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching my wife of 23 years acting like a teenager with her boyfriend. The man looked younger than me, maybe early 50s, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch that caught the light from our lamp, the lamp I'd bought for Riley's birthday 2 years ago. When Riley finally looked up and saw me, she didn't jump apart from him. She didn't look embarrassed or ashamed. Instead, she smiled. Actually smiled. "Oh, Paul's home," she said to the man, as if I were the mailman making a delivery. Perfect timing, actually. The stranger looked me up and down with obvious disdain, taking in my work clothes and paint-stained hands. I'd spent the day renovating a client's bathroom, honest work that paid our bills, though apparently Riley had found someone who looked like he'd never worked with his hands a day in his life. "Riley," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what's going on here?" She stood up slowly, smoothing down her dress, a new dress I'd never seen before. "What's going on, Paul, is that I'm done pretending." My chest felt tight. 23 years of marriage, and this was how it was ending. In our living room, with a stranger watching like this, was entertainment. Done pretending what? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer, that I'm happy, that this marriage means anything to me, that you're enough. Each word hit like a physical blow. Marcus here has shown me what I've been missing. Marcus, even his name sounded expensive. Riley walked to the coffee table and picked up a manila envelope I hadn't noticed before. She held it out to me with the same casual gesture she might use to hand me the mail. "Divorce papers," she said simply. "I need you to sign them. Tonight." I stared at the envelope like it might bite me. "Riley, we should talk about this. Maybe we can work things out. Go to counseling." "There's nothing to work out," she interrupted, her voice sharp now. "I've been unhappy for years, Paul. Years. You just never paid attention." Marcus chuckled from the couch, and Riley smiled at him like they shared some private joke. The casual cruelty of it made my hands shake. "Sign the papers, Paul," she continued. "Make this easy on both of us. You can find a nice little apartment somewhere, start over, maybe find someone more suitable for your situation." The way she said situation made it clear she thought I was beneath her now. Maybe I always had been, and I was just too blind to see it. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The papers were thick, official-looking, filled with legal language I didn't fully understand. But I understood enough. Riley wanted half of everything. The house, my retirement savings, my truck, everything I'd worked for. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at her. "Why now? What changed?" Riley exchanged another look with Marcus, and they both laughed. "What changed is that I met a real man," she said. "Someone who can give me the life I deserve. Someone who doesn't come home with dirt under his fingernails and paint in his hair." Marcus stood up then, putting his arm around Riley's waist in a gesture that was clearly meant to claim territory. "Nothing personal, buddy," he said to me, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Sometimes these things just run their course." I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, that had been cracking for months as Riley grew more distant and critical. Something deeper. My sense of who I was, maybe. The man who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for this house. The man who'd surprised Riley with trips and gifts even when money was tight. The man who'd loved her completely, even when she stopped loving me back. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "That's not my problem anymore," Riley said, then walked over to Marcus's briefcase and pulled out a pen. She held it out to me. "Sign here, here, and here." I looked at the papers again, at the places marked with yellow sticky notes. My signature would end everything. Our marriage, my claim to the house, my financial security. At 62, I'd be starting over with nothing. But what choice did I have? Fight a woman who clearly despised me? Contest a divorce when my wife was sitting on another man's lap in front of me? I took the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady, but I signed my name on each line. Paul Henderson. Paul Henderson. Paul Henderson. Each signature felt like signing away a piece of myself. Riley snatched the papers away before the ink was dry, her face lighting up with genuine joy for the first time in months. "Finally," she breathed. "Marcus, it's done. We can finally move forward with our plans." Our plans. They'd been planning this. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, or even a recent development. They'd been plotting my humiliation, probably for weeks or months. "I'll need a few days to pack my things," I said quietly. "Actually," Riley said, not even looking at me as she organized the papers, "I'd prefer if you were out by tomorrow night. Marcus is moving in this weekend, and it would be awkward having you here." Moving in. This weekend. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that I actually felt dizzy. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, my former bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed Riley and I had shared for over 2 decades. Below me, I could hear them celebrating, opening what sounded like a bottle of champagne. They were toasting my destruction. As I sat there in the growing darkness, staring at the framed photos of our life together that would soon be thrown away or replaced with pictures of Riley and Marcus, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not sadness, though that was there too. Not anger, though that was building. It was clarity. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could see everything clearly. And what I saw made me smile. Just a little. Despite everything that had just happened. Riley had no idea what she'd just done. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Downstairs, Riley and Marcus had made themselves comfortable in what was supposed to be my home, their voices and laughter drifting up through the floorboards like a soundtrack to my humiliation. Every now and then, I'd hear the clink of glasses, another cork being popped, more celebration of my defeat. I packed one suitcase with essentials, moving quietly through the bedroom that had been mine for 15 years. My hands moved automatically, clothes, toiletries, a few books, while my mind wandered to memories I'd probably never make in this house again. The morning light was just starting to creep through the curtains when my phone rang. It was 7:30 in the morning, and the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Is this Paul Henderson?" The voice on the other end was frantic, almost panicked. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is David Morrison. I represent Riley Henderson in her divorce proceedings. Mr. Henderson, I need to ask you a very important question. What exactly did you sign last night?" The panic in his voice sent a chill down my spine. "The divorce papers, the ones Riley gave me." There was a long silence, then what sounded like papers shuffling frantically. "Mr. Henderson, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Did you read everything you signed? Every single page?" I signed where she told me to sign." "Why? What's wrong?" Another silence, longer this time. When David spoke again, his voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "Mr. Henderson, I think you need to get your own attorney, immediately." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, confusion mixing with something that might have been hope. What could be wrong with divorce papers? Riley had seemed so confident, so sure that she was getting everything she wanted. Downstairs, I could hear movement, Riley's voice talking quietly to someone, Marcus probably. Then footsteps on the stairs, quick and purposeful. Riley appeared in the bedroom doorway, but she looked different than she had the night before. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like worry. "Paul," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." "I thought we said everything we needed to say last night." She stepped into the room, glancing nervously at my packed suitcase. "About the papers you signed. I just want to make sure you understood everything." "You mean the papers where I give you half of everything I've worked for?" "Yeah, I understood that part pretty clearly." Something flickered across her face, confusion, maybe even fear. Half of what exactly? It was such a strange question that I actually turned to look at her fully. Half of what? Riley, what are you talking about? Half of everything we own. The house, the savings, my retirement account. She was shaking her head before I finished speaking. But Paul, what savings? What retirement account? You work construction. You make okay money, but it's not like we're rich. Now it was my turn to be confused. Riley, what do you think pays for all this? I gestured around the bedroom, with its expensive furniture and the view of our landscaped backyard. What do you think paid for your car, your shopping trips, the vacation to Hawaii last year? Your job pays for it, she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Your construction work. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the situation. Riley, I make $45,000 a year doing construction. This house costs more than that just in property taxes. The color drained from her face. What are you saying? Before I could answer, her phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and her face went even paler. It's David, she said, more to herself than to me. She answered on the second ring. David, what's going on? You sounded panicked this morning. Even from across the room, I could hear David's voice, loud and agitated. Riley held the phone away from her ear slightly, and I caught fragments of what he was saying. Property records, trust documents, never told me. Completely different situation. Riley's free hand was pressed against her forehead, and she was shaking her head slowly. David, slow down. What trust documents? What are you talking about? More frantic talking from David's end. Riley's eyes found mine across the room, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely scared. I'll call you back, she said abruptly, and hung up. We stared at each other in silence for a long moment. Finally, Riley spoke. Paul, I need you to explain something to me. If you only make $45,000 a year, how do we afford this lifestyle? I sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling very tired. Riley, in 23 years of marriage, you never once asked me about our finances. You never wanted to know where the money came from, as long as it kept coming. I assumed. I thought it was your job, maybe some investments. It was investments, just not the kind you think. Her phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a name I recognized. Bradley Thornton, the most expensive divorce attorney in the state. Riley had clearly been planning this divorce for longer than I'd realized. She answered quickly. Mr. Thornton, thank you for calling me back. I need to ask you about something. I couldn't hear Bradley's side of the conversation, but I watched Riley's face grow more confused and frightened with each passing second. No, he works construction, she was saying. He's just a regular working guy. What do you mean, Henderson Trust? What Henderson Trust? My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt a familiar warmth in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in months. Paul, the paperwork went through. Everything's in motion now. Hope you're ready. Uncle William. I deleted the message quickly, but not before Riley caught the movement. Who was that? She demanded, hanging up on poor Bradley mid-sentence. Nobody important, but my phone was ringing again. This time it was a number with a New York area code. Mr. Henderson, this is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh, Pemberton and Associates. I understand congratulations are in order. Riley was staring at me now, her mouth slightly open. I kept my voice neutral. Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, everything went exactly as planned. Excellent. The transfer protocols are already in motion. Should we expect you in the city next week for the transition meetings? I'll let you know. I hung up and looked at Riley, who seemed to be having trouble breathing. Paul, she said slowly, what the hell is going on? My phone buzzed again. Another text, this one from a number I'd been expecting to hear from. Saw the news about the divorce. Time to come home, nephew. Your real life is waiting. Aunt Margaret. I couldn't help but smile as I read it. After all these years of pretending to be someone I wasn't, of hiding who I really was to protect Riley from a world she couldn't handle, it was finally over. Riley's voice was barely a whisper now. Paul, please. I don't understand what's happening. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Riley had always loved. She'd never known that the landscaping alone had cost more than most people made in a year. She'd never asked where the money came from for the imported stone, the rare plants, the irrigation system that kept everything perfect even during droughts. Riley, I said without turning around, there's a lot you don't understand. There's a lot you never wanted to understand. Behind me, I heard Marcus's voice calling from downstairs. Riley, everything okay up there? She didn't answer him. She was still staring at me, and I could see in her reflection in the window that she was starting to realize something was very, very wrong with her perfect plan. Who are you? She whispered. I turned around then, and for the first time in years, I let her see who I really was. Not the humble construction worker she'd married, not the simple man she'd grown tired of, but the person I'd been hiding from her for over 2 decades. "Riley," I said quietly, "you have no idea what you just signed away." Riley's legs gave out. She actually sat down hard on the bed, staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Marcus was still calling from downstairs, his voice getting more impatient, but she seemed to have forgotten he existed. "I don't understand," she whispered, shaking her head slowly. "Paul, you're scaring me. Just tell me what's going on." I walked to the dresser and opened the bottom drawer, pushing aside the old t-shirts I kept there. Underneath was a manila folder I'd hoped I'd never have to open in front of Riley. But she'd made her choice last night, and now it was time for both of us to live with the consequences. "Do you remember when we first looked at this house?" I asked, pulling out the folder. "You fell in love with it immediately. You said it was perfect, but way out of our price range." "Yes, and then you said you'd found a way to make it work." Her voice trailed off as she watched me open the folder. "I didn't find a way to make it work, Riley. The house was never out of our price range. It was never even expensive for us." I pulled out the first document and held it up so she could see the letterhead. "Henderson Family Trust, established 1978. Her eyes darted across the page, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "What is this?" "This is the trust that actually owns this house, and the land it sits on, and the house next door that we rent out, and the commercial property downtown that you think belongs to the Millers." Riley's face was white now. "Paul, I don't understand what you're saying." I sat down in the chair across from the bed, the folder open on my lap. "My grandfather was Henry Henderson. Ever heard of Henderson Steel?" "Henderson Steel? The company that built half the skyscrapers in Chicago?" "The same one. Henry was my grandfather. When he died, he left everything in trust for his children and grandchildren. My father preferred to live quietly, so he used his share to invest in real estate and other businesses. When he died 10 years ago, his portion came to me." Riley was shaking her head violently. No, that's not possible. You work construction. You come home dirty and tired. You complain about difficult customers and bad weather. I work construction because I like working with my hands. It keeps me grounded, keeps me connected to regular people. But Riley, I've never needed the money from that job. Not for a single day of our marriage." I pulled out another document. "Henderson Properties, LLC. We own 17 rental properties in this city alone. Then there's Henderson Holdings, which has shares in 6 different companies, and Henderson Investments, which manages a portfolio worth." I paused, looking at the latest statement. "About $12 million. The number hung in the air between us like a physical thing. Riley's mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. 12, she finally managed. 12 million? And that's just the liquid investments. The real estate holdings are worth considerably more." Riley stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This is insane. Paul, if you're some kind of millionaire, why have we lived like regular people?" "Because I wanted to live like regular people. Because I wanted to marry someone who loved me for who I was, not what I had. Because I watched what money did to my cousins' marriages, how it attracted the wrong kind of people." She stopped pacing and stared at me. "So you lied to me. For 23 years you lied to me." "I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything. There's a difference." "Is there?" Her voice was getting shrill now. "You let me think we were struggling sometimes. You let me worry about money, about the mortgage, about retirement, all while you were sitting on millions of dollars?" Before I could answer, Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Riley, what's all the shouting about? And why aren't you answering me when I call you?" Riley turned to him, her face flushed with anger and confusion. "Marcus, did you know? Did you know about any of this?" "Know about what?" He looked between us, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding it. Riley grabbed the trust documents from my lap and shoved them at Marcus. "Look at these. Look at what Paul's been hiding." Marcus took the papers, his expression skeptical, but as he read, his face changed. The casual arrogance disappeared, replaced by something that looked like shock, maybe even fear. "Henderson Trust," he read aloud. 12 million in investments. "Riley, what the hell is this?" "It's who Paul really is," she said bitterly. "It's what he's been hiding from me for our entire marriage." Marcus looked up at me, and I could see him recalculating everything. Last night he'd seen me as a threat to be dismissed, just some working-class husband who was in his way. Now he was looking at a man who could buy and sell him without noticing the expense. "Paul," Riley said, her voice taking on a different tone now. Softer, more conciliatory. We need to talk about this, about us. Maybe I was hasty last night. Maybe we can work things out after all. I almost laughed. 24 hours ago, she'd been perched on another man's lap, humiliating me in my own living room. Now that she knew about the money, suddenly our marriage was worth saving. Riley, you signed divorce papers last night. You made your choice very clear. But I didn't know. I didn't understand the whole situation. You understood enough. You understood that you didn't love me anymore. You understood that you wanted to be with Marcus instead. My financial situation doesn't change any of that. Marcus was still holding the trust documents, reading through them with increasing alarm. Riley, he said quietly, we need to talk, privately. But Riley wasn't listening to him. She was focused entirely on me now, her mind clearly racing through the implications of what she'd learned. Paul, the divorce papers. What exactly did I sign? I mean, what are the terms? I pulled another document from the folder. You signed a standard divorce decree with the division of marital assets as filed. The problem is there aren't any marital assets. What do you mean? I mean this house isn't in my name, Riley. It's owned by the Henderson Trust, which was established long before we met. My investment accounts aren't marital property either. They're trust distributions that legally belong to the trust, not to me personally. Even my truck is owned by Henderson Properties LLC for tax purposes. The color was draining from her face again, but the savings account, our joint checking account, has about $3,000 in it. That's the only thing we actually own together. I closed the folder and set it aside. Congratulations, Riley. You're entitled to half of $3,000, $1,500 for 23 years of marriage. Marcus dropped the papers like they were on fire. Riley, we need to go, right now. But Riley was staring at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Paul, this can't be legal. I was married to you for 23 years. I have rights. You have the rights that the law gives you to marital property. But since there is no marital property, there's nothing to divide. But I lived here. I was your wife. I contributed to this household. You were my wife, and I supported you completely for 23 years. I paid for everything, your clothes, your car, your trips, your spending money. But legally, you were never entitled to property that wasn't mine to begin with. She was shaking now, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone. I'm calling David. This can't be right. There has to be something. Riley, I said gently. David already knows. That's why he was panicking this morning. That's why he told you to get your own attorney. He's realizing that he filed a divorce case based on information that was completely wrong. Marcus grabbed Riley's arm. We're leaving, now. But Riley jerked away from him. No. Paul, we can fix this. We can tear up those papers. We can pretend last night never happened. Riley, those papers are already filed. The divorce is already in motion. And even if it wasn't, I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden one last time. Last night you made it very clear what you think of me. That hasn't changed just because you found out about the money. Behind me, I heard Marcus trying to pull Riley toward the door. Come on, we need to figure this out somewhere else. Figure what out? Riley's voice was getting hysterical. Marcus, don't you understand? I have nothing. I'm getting nothing. $1,500 for 23 years of my life. We'll figure something out, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe we can contest it, find a lawyer who can fight this. I turned around then. Marcus, you might want to think carefully about your next move. The Henderson Trust has some of the best attorneys in the country on retainer. They've been protecting family assets for over 4 decades. Do you really think you can out-lawyer them? Marcus's face went pale. He was beginning to understand the scope of what they were up against. Riley was crying now, real tears for the first time since this all began. But they weren't tears of sadness over our marriage. They were tears of rage and frustration over money she'd never actually had a claim to. This isn't over, Paul, she said through her tears. I'll find a way to fight this. I'll prove that you defrauded me, that you hid assets. Riley, I said quietly, you're welcome to try, but I'd suggest you save your money. You're going to need it. As they left, Marcus practically dragging a sobbing Riley behind him, I heard her making phone calls. Lawyers, probably, looking for someone willing to take on an impossible case for a woman who couldn't afford to pay them. I sat back down in the chair and looked around the bedroom that had been mine for 15 years. Tomorrow it would just be mine again. No more walking on eggshells, No more pretending to be less than I was. No more hiding my real life to protect someone who never appreciated the sacrifice. For the first time in years, I felt free. The house felt different after they left. Quieter, yes, but also somehow lighter, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with new eyes. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every carefully chosen detail, all of it had been selected and paid for, while Riley remained completely oblivious to where the money actually came from. My phone rang again. This time it was Uncle William, calling from the family estate in Connecticut. "Paul, my boy, how are you holding up?" I settled into my chair in the study, the one room in the house Riley rarely entered because she found my books and papers boring. "I'm fine, Uncle William. Better than fine, actually." "Good. I have to say, when you told us your plan 3 years ago, some of us thought you were being too patient. Your cousin James wanted to hire investigators, gather evidence, force the issue." I smiled, remembering that family meeting. James always did prefer the direct approach. "Well, it turns out your way was smarter. Letting her reveal herself completely on her own terms was brilliant. No one can say you trapped her or manipulated the situation." 3 years ago. Had it really been that long since I'd first begun to suspect that Riley was having affairs? Looking back now, the signs had been obvious. The sudden interest in her appearance, the mysterious errands that took longer than they should have, the way she'd started questioning everything about our life together. But it was the conversation I'd overheard that really opened my eyes. I'd come home early from a job site, hoping to surprise Riley with dinner from her favorite restaurant. I'd walked in through the back door, planning to set up the meal in the dining room before calling her down. That's when I heard her voice from upstairs talking on the phone. "No, he has no idea," she was saying, her voice filled with the kind of excitement I hadn't heard from her in years. "He thinks I'm just restless, maybe going through a midlife crisis. He keeps suggesting counseling, like talking about our feelings is going to fix anything." I'd frozen at the bottom of the stairs, the takeout bag still in my hands. "The truth is, I'm just bored with him," she continued. "He's a good man, don't get me wrong, reliable, steady, hard-working, but God, he's so ordinary, so predictable. Every day, it's the same thing. Work, dinner, television, bed. I feel like I'm dying of boredom." There had been a pause while the person on the other end responded. I know. And you're right about the house. He's always been weird about money, like he's afraid to spend it. We could afford so much more than this, but he acts like every dollar is precious. Sometimes I think he's just cheap." Another pause. "Well, that's why I haven't left yet. I mean, we do have a nice life. The house is beautiful. I can buy pretty much whatever I want. We take nice vacations. But I want more than nice. I want exciting. I want passionate. I want to feel alive again." I'd set the takeout bags on the kitchen counter and walked back outside, my heart pounding. She wanted exciting. She wanted passionate. She wanted to feel alive. And apparently, 23 years of marriage to me had left her feeling like she was dying. That night, I'd called Uncle William. "I think Riley is having an affair," I'd told him. "Or at least thinking about it. What do you want to do about it?" he'd asked, getting straight to the point in that way the Henderson family was known for. "I don't know yet, but I think I need to prepare for the worst." That's when Uncle William had suggested involving the family attorneys. Not to spy on Riley or build a case against her, but to make sure that if our marriage did end, it would end on terms that protected the family assets. "The trust has provisions for this kind of situation," he'd explained. "Your grandfather wasn't naive about human nature. He knew that sometimes family members would marry people who turned out to be problematic." The attorneys had been discreet but thorough. They'd reviewed every document, every account, every piece of property. The conclusion had been both simple and devastating. Legally, Riley had no claim to any of the Henderson family wealth. The trust structure that had protected the family's assets for decades would protect them from Riley too, but I hadn't wanted to end my marriage based on suspicion and overheard phone conversations. I'd hoped that maybe Riley was just going through a difficult period, that we could work through whatever was making her so unhappy. So I'd waited, and watched, and tried to be a better husband. I'd surprised her with weekend trips to places she'd mentioned wanting to visit. I'd bought her jewelry, flowers, expensive dinners. I'd even suggested we renew our wedding vows, thinking that maybe if we reconnected with why we'd fallen in love in the first place, we could find our way back to each other. Riley had accepted everything graciously, but the distance between us had only grown. The phone calls continued. I'd learned to recognize the tone she used when she was talking to her friend. The mysterious errands became more frequent. She'd started working out obsessively, buying new clothes, experimenting with different makeup and hairstyles. It was like watching my wife slowly transform into someone I didn't recognize. The final confirmation had come 6 months ago. I'd hired a private investigator, not because I wanted to catch Riley in the act, but because I needed to know for certain what I was dealing with. The pictures he'd shown me weren't graphic or salacious. Just Riley having coffee with a man I didn't recognize, holding his hand across the table. Riley kissing the same man goodbye outside a hotel. Riley getting into his car outside a restaurant I'd never been to. The man turned out to be Marcus Pemberton, a divorced businessman who managed investment portfolios for wealthy clients. Ironic, considering that he was trying to get close to a woman who had no wealth of her own. But the investigation had revealed something else interesting about Marcus. He was in debt up to his eyeballs, having lost most of his money in some bad investment deals a few years earlier. His expensive car was leased, his fancy condo was rented, and his expensive clothes were mostly purchased on credit cards that were nearly maxed out. Marcus wasn't just after Riley's supposed money. He needed it desperately. Armed with this information, I'd made a decision that surprised even Uncle William. Instead of confronting Riley or filing for divorce myself, I would wait for her to make the first move. I would let her think she was in control. Let her believe she was the one calling the shots. Why? Uncle William had asked. Because if I file first, she'll always be able to claim that I blindsided her, that she didn't understand what she was giving up. But if she files, if she's the one pushing for the divorce, then she can't claim she was deceived. It had taken another 6 months, but my patience had been rewarded. Riley had not only filed for divorce, but she'd done it in the most humiliating way possible. She'd forced me to sign papers in front of her lover in our living room, while they celebrated my supposed downfall. Now, sitting in my study with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't experienced in years. Riley had made her choice freely, completely, and very publicly. There would be no going back, no second guessing, no wondering if I'd made the right decision. My phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from my cousin James. Saw the lawyers panic this morning. Dad says you handled it perfectly. Family dinner Sunday to celebrate your freedom. I typed back quickly. Wouldn't miss it. For the first time in 3 years, I was looking forward to seeing my family without having to pretend to be someone I wasn't. No more making excuses for why Riley couldn't attend family gatherings. No more deflecting questions about when we might have children, or why we lived so modestly when we could afford much more. No more hiding who I really was to protect someone who had never appreciated the sacrifice. Another message came in, this one from Aunt Margaret. Your room is ready whenever you want to come home. We've missed having you around. Home. The word felt strange after so many years of thinking of this house as home. But Aunt Margaret was right. The family estate in Connecticut had always been home in ways this house never quite managed to be. It was where I'd grown up after my parents died, where I'd learned about responsibility and legacy and what it meant to be a Henderson. It was also where I'd learned to be suspicious of people who were too interested in the Henderson name and not interested enough in the person who carried it. That lesson had served me well with Riley, even if it had taken me too long to fully accept what it meant for our marriage. I walked upstairs to pack the rest of my things. Tomorrow, I would start the process of reclaiming my real life. But tonight, I would sleep in this house one last time, not as the humble construction worker Riley had married, but as Paul Henderson, heir to a legacy that was finally, after 23 years of hiding, about to become visible again. Outside, I could hear a car pulling into the driveway. Riley, probably, coming back with reinforcements. More lawyers, maybe, or family members who might be willing to take her side. It didn't matter. Let them come. Let them see the documents. Talk to the attorneys. Rage against the unfairness of it all. The Henderson Trust had weathered bigger storms than a bitter divorce. It would weather this one, too. The car in the driveway turned out to be Riley's sister, Janet, followed closely by their mother, Dolores. I watched from the upstairs window as the three women huddled together on the front porch, their voices raised in animated discussion. Every few minutes, one of them would gesture toward the house, and I could see the anger and disbelief on their faces even from this distance. My phone had been ringing constantly for the past 2 hours. Riley's family, friends who'd heard pieces of the story, even some neighbors who'd noticed the unusual activity. I'd stopped answering after the 5th call, letting everything go to voicemail. The messages were becoming increasingly frantic as word spread about Riley's situation. "Paul, this is Janet. You need to call me back right now. We need to talk about what you're doing to my sister." "Paul, it's Dolores. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you can't treat Riley like this. She's family." "Paul, this is Father McKenna from St. Mary's. Riley called me very upset. Perhaps we could meet and discuss this situation like civilized people." Each message revealed how little these people understood about what had actually happened. In their minds, I was the villain, the vengeful husband who was using some legal technicality to punish Riley for wanting a divorce. None of them seemed to grasp that Riley had orchestrated her own downfall. A loud banging on the front door interrupted my thoughts. When I looked out the window, I saw Marcus standing on the porch, his face red with anger. Riley was beside him, but she looked different now. Smaller somehow, deflated. The confident woman who demanded I sign divorce papers 24 hours ago had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened. I walked downstairs and opened the door, but kept the chain lock engaged so it only opened a few inches. "We need to talk," Marcus said immediately, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." "The hell we don't. You manipulated this entire situation. You let Riley file for divorce knowing she had no idea what she was giving up." I almost laughed. "Marcus, Riley spent 23 years of marriage never once asking about our finances. She never wanted to know where the money came from as long as it kept coming. How is that my fault?" Riley pushed past Marcus, pressing her face close to the gap in the door. "Paul, please, we can work this out. I made a mistake. I know that now, but we can fix this." "Riley, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose Marcus over me. You chose to humiliate me in our living room rather than have an honest conversation about what was wrong with our marriage. You chose to file for divorce based on assumptions you never bothered to verify." "But I didn't know." She started, then stopped, perhaps realizing how that sounded. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," I said firmly. "For 23 years, you were happy to live off money you never questioned as long as it funded the lifestyle you wanted. Now that you realize it was never really yours, suddenly you want to understand how everything works." Marcus was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane. There has to be some legal recourse. You can't just hide millions of dollars from your wife for decades." "I didn't hide anything, Marcus. I just didn't advertise it. There's a difference." "Semantics," he spat. "No, it's the law, which is something you might want to research before you make any more threats." Riley's mother appeared behind them, her face flushed with indignation. "Paul Henderson, you should be ashamed of yourself. This is not how a Christian man behaves." "Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, a Christian man also doesn't deserve to be humiliated by his wife and her lover in his own home." Dolores recoiled as if I'd slapped her. That's different." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, Riley broke our marriage vows, not me. Riley chose to be unfaithful, not me. Riley demanded a divorce, not me. I just signed the papers she asked me to sign." The truth of that seemed to settle over the group like a cold fog. Even Marcus stopped pacing, perhaps beginning to understand that his anger was misdirected. Riley tried a different approach, her voice becoming softer, more pleading. "Paul, I know I hurt you. I know what I did was wrong. But please, don't destroy my life over it. Don't leave me with nothing. Riley, I'm not leaving you with nothing. I'm leaving you with exactly what you're legally entitled to. Half of our marital assets, $1,500, plus whatever you have in your personal accounts." $1,500! Janet exploded. "That's not enough to live on for a month." Then maybe Riley should have thought about that before she decided our marriage was over. Marcus stepped forward again, his fists clenched. "You son of a bitch, you planned this whole thing, didn't you? You knew she was unhappy, you knew she wanted out, and you let her walk into a trap." "Marcus, I didn't set any trap. Riley dug her own hole. I just didn't stop her from jumping into it. But you could have warned her. You could have told her the truth about your finances before she filed." "Why would I do that?" "So she could hire better lawyers. So she could try to find some way to get her hands on money that was never hers to begin with." The question hung in the air, and I could see the answer dawning on their faces. Of course I wasn't going to help Riley build a case against me. Of course I wasn't going to provide ammunition for her divorce attorneys. What kind of person would do that? Riley's phone rang, and she answered it quickly. "David, please tell me you have good news." Even standing several feet away, I could hear David's voice through the phone, and the news wasn't good. "Riley, I've been on the phone with 3 different law firms today. The consensus is unanimous. You don't have a case. The Henderson Trust is ironclad. Every asset you thought was marital property is actually owned by entities that predate your marriage by decades." Riley's face crumpled. "But there has to be something." "There is something," David continued, his voice gentle but firm. "You can accept the settlement as it stands, $1,500 plus your personal belongings, and move on with your life. Or you can spend the next 5 years fighting a legal battle you can't win and can't afford." Riley hung up without responding, staring at the phone in her hand like it had betrayed her. Marcus grabbed her arm. "We'll find another lawyer, someone who specializes in cases like this." "With what money?" Riley asked quietly. "David wants $10,000 just to review the trust documents properly. Even if we found someone willing to take the case, they'd want a retainer I can't afford." The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. For 23 years, Riley had lived a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle without ever having to worry about money. Now she was facing the prospect of starting over at 52 with almost nothing. "Paul," she said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes, "I know you have every right to hate me. I know I destroyed our marriage. But please, don't let me end up homeless. Don't let me lose everything." It was the first time since this whole mess started that Riley had acknowledged what she'd actually done. No more blaming me for hiding assets. No more claiming she'd been deceived. Just a woman who had made terrible choices and was finally facing the consequences. "Riley," I said softly, "you're not going to be homeless. You have family, friends. You have a college degree and work experience. You'll figure something out. But the house, all my things, the house was never yours, Riley. It was never ours. As for your things, you can take whatever belongs to you personally. Your clothes, your jewelry, your car, that's all yours." Marcus was looking increasingly uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot and avoiding eye contact with Riley. I could practically see him calculating whether a relationship with a woman who had $1,500 to her name was worth pursuing. Riley must have noticed his hesitation because she turned to him with desperation in her voice. "Marcus, you said we'd figure this out together. You said you loved me." Marcus cleared his throat, still not meeting her eyes. "Riley, this changes things. I thought we were talking about splitting millions of dollars. I thought we'd be able to travel, buy a nice place together. So you only wanted me for the money?" The devastation in Riley's voice was obvious. "It's not that simple," Marcus said, but his tone suggested it was exactly that simple. "I have my own financial obligations. I can't support both of us on my income alone." And there it was, the final piece of Riley's perfect plan crumbling before her eyes. Not only was she losing the financial security she'd taken for granted, but she was also losing the man she'd thrown away her marriage to pursue. "I need to go," Marcus said abruptly. "I need to think about all this." He walked away without another word, leaving Riley standing on the porch with her family, watching her supposed knight in shining armor disappear down the driveway. Riley's knees buckled, and Janet had to catch her to keep her from falling. For the first time since I'd known her, Riley looked truly broken. Not angry, not defiant, not scheming for a way out. Just broken. "Paul," Dolores said, her voice much quieter now. "She's learned her lesson. Surely that's enough." I looked at Riley, sobbing in her sister's arms, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no revenge, no pity, just an empty sort of finality. "Mrs. Chen," I said, "Riley has 3 days to collect her personal belongings. After that, I'm changing the locks." I closed the door and walked back upstairs, leaving them to figure out what came next. Through the window I watched as they helped Riley to Janet's car, her whole body shaking with sobs. By tomorrow, word would spread through their social circle about what had happened. Some people would take Riley's side, painting me as the cruel husband who abandoned his wife when she needed him most. Others would see the truth, that Riley had orchestrated her own downfall through greed and betrayal. But their opinions didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I was finally free to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't, free to reclaim the life I'd put on hold for over 2 decades. In 3 days, when Riley was gone and the locks were changed, I would pack my real belongings and leave this house forever. The Henderson family had other properties, better properties, where I could start over without the ghosts of a marriage that should have ended years ago. For the first time in longer than I could remember, the future looked bright. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of the Henderson family estate in Connecticut, watching the sun set over the gardens my great-grandfather had planted nearly a century ago. The view stretched for miles across rolling hills dotted with oak trees, their leaves just beginning to turn the brilliant oranges and reds of early autumn. It felt like coming home after a very long journey. The transition had been smoother than I'd expected. Riley had collected her belongings within the 3-day deadline, though she'd needed help from her family to do it. I'd watched from the upstairs window as they loaded her clothes, jewelry, and personal items into Janet's SUV and a rented truck. She'd taken the car, of course, a 3-year-old BMW that was legally hers, since I'd put it in her name as an anniversary gift. What she'd left behind told its own story. The expensive artwork I'd bought over the years, the designer furniture, the rare books, the wine collection, all the things that had made our house feel luxurious, but that Riley had never really appreciated. She'd taken what had obvious resale value and left the rest, probably not understanding that some of the items she'd dismissed were worth more than her car. But that was Riley's pattern, wasn't it? Taking what seemed valuable on the surface while missing the real treasure underneath. The house had sold quickly. Officially, it had been sold by Henderson Properties LLC to a young family who appreciated its history and character. The proceeds went back into the trust, where they joined the rest of the Henderson wealth that had been accumulated over 4 generations of careful stewardship. Unofficially, I was glad to see it go to people who would love it the way it deserved to be loved. I'd kept track of Riley's situation through mutual friends, not out of any lingering affection, but out of simple human curiosity. The story was about what I'd expected. She'd moved in with Janet temporarily, then found a small apartment across town when that arrangement became too stressful. She'd gotten a job at a real estate office, using the sales skills she'd developed over years of charity fundraising. Marcus had disappeared from her life within 2 weeks of the divorce finalization. Apparently, his interest in Riley had been entirely dependent on her supposed access to wealth. When that evaporated, so did he. According to Janet, who'd run into my cousin James at a coffee shop, Riley was struggling but surviving. She'd had to adjust to a very different lifestyle, shopping at discount stores instead of boutiques, eating at chain restaurants instead of the upscale places she'd grown accustomed to. But she was working, paying her own bills, and slowly building some kind of independent life. She asks about you sometimes, James had told me during our last phone conversation. Janet says she wonders if you're happy. What did you tell her? The truth? That you're the happiest I've seen you in 20 years? And it was true. Living at the family estate felt like shedding a costume I'd worn for so long I'd almost forgotten it wasn't really me. Here, I didn't have to pretend to worry about money or hide my education or downplay my interests. I could be Paul Henderson, not Paul the construction worker who happened to make enough money to afford a nice house. The family had welcomed me back with open arms, but without any sense of, I told you so. They'd all known that my marriage to Riley was problematic, but they'd respected my choice to try to make it work. Now that it was over, they were simply glad to have me home. Paul, Aunt Margaret's voice came from behind me. Dinner's ready. I turned to see her standing in the doorway of the terrace, elegant as always in her simple but expensive dress. At 78, she was still the unofficial head of the Henderson family, the one who'd raised me after my parents died, and who'd taught me the values that had eventually saved me from making an even bigger mistake with Riley. Coming, I said, taking one last look at the sunset. The dining room was warm with candlelight and filled with the voices of family members I hadn't seen regularly in years. Uncle William was there with his wife Caroline, their son James and his family, cousin Patricia with her husband and teenage daughter. 3 generations of Hendersons gathered around the same table where my great-grandfather had made the decisions that created the foundation of our family's wealth. A toast, Uncle William said, raising his wine glass as I took my seat. To Paul, for finally coming home where he belongs. To Paul, the others echoed, and I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in decades. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily from family business to politics to James's daughter's college plans. No one asked about Riley or the divorce unless I brought it up, which I rarely did. That chapter of my life was closed, and everyone seemed to understand that I preferred to keep it that way. After dinner, Aunt Margaret and I walked through the house, past portraits of Henderson ancestors and furniture that had been in the family for generations. We ended up in the library, where floor-to-ceiling shelves held first editions and family documents dating back to the 1800s. There's something I want to show you, she said, walking to an antique desk near the window. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. "This belonged to your great-grandfather," she said, handing it to me. "He started writing in it when he was about your age, after he'd made his first serious money in the steel business." I opened the journal carefully, scanning the faded handwriting on pages that were over 70 years old. "The most important lesson I've learned," I read aloud, "is that money reveals character rather than building it. Those who love you for yourself will continue to love you whether you have money or not. Those who love you for your money will abandon you the moment they realize the money comes with conditions they're not willing to accept." I looked up at Aunt Margaret, who was smiling softly. "He wrote that after his first wife left him," she explained. "She'd married him when he was just starting out, when they were both young and poor, but as his wealth grew, she changed. She became demanding, entitled, focused only on what his money could buy, rather than the man who was earning it." "What happened to her?" "She ran off with a man who promised her a more exciting life. A man who, it turned out, was married to someone else and had no intention of leaving his wife. She ended up alone and bitter, while your great-grandfather eventually found your great-grandmother, a woman who fell in love with his character, not his bank account." I continued reading through the journal, finding page after page of wisdom about family, money, and the responsibilities that came with wealth. But it was the final entry that struck me most profoundly. "I have built something that will last beyond my lifetime," my great-grandfather had written. "Not just money, but a legacy of values. The trust I've established will protect future generations from those who would exploit them, but more importantly, it will teach them that true wealth comes from knowing who you are and refusing to compromise that knowledge for anyone." "He'd be proud of you," Aunt Margaret said quietly. "You honored his values, even when it cost you personally." "It didn't cost me," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "It saved me." Over the following weeks, I settled into a routine that felt both new and familiar. I still worked occasionally, not because I needed the money, but because I enjoyed the physical challenge and the satisfaction of creating something with my hands. But now I worked on projects I chose for people I liked, without worrying about supporting a lifestyle that had never really been mine. I also began taking a more active role in the family business. The Henderson Trust wasn't just a passive repository of wealth. It was an active enterprise that required careful management and strategic thinking. Uncle William was getting older and had been looking for someone to gradually take over some of his responsibilities. "You have good instincts," he told me during one of our weekly business meetings. "And more importantly, you understand what this family's wealth is really for. It's not about luxury or status. It's about security, independence, and the freedom to make choices based on your values rather than your circumstances." 3 months after moving back to the estate, I met Catherine. She was the librarian at the local historical society, a woman in her mid-50s with gray-streaked hair and intelligent eyes who knew more about local history than anyone I'd ever met. We'd struck up a conversation when I'd come in to research some of my great-grandfather's business dealings, and that conversation had stretched into dinner, then a second dinner, then regular visits that had nothing to do with historical research. Catherine knew who I was. It was impossible to live in this area without knowing about the Henderson family, but she treated me like any other person she found interesting. She was impressed by my knowledge of architecture and construction, amused by my stories about difficult clients, and genuinely interested in my thoughts about books and current events. She was also completely unimpressed by my money. "I make $42,000 a year," she told me matter-of-factly during our 4th dinner together. "I live in a 1-bedroom apartment, I drive a 7-year-old Honda, and I'm perfectly happy with my life. If you're looking for someone to help you spend your fortune, you're looking at the wrong woman." I'd laughed, remembering my great-grandfather's journal entry about character being revealed rather than built by money. "Catherine," I'd said, "I spent 23 years with someone who was very interested in helping me spend money. I'm looking for someone who's interested in me." That had been the beginning of something I hadn't experienced since I was young, a relationship based on genuine compatibility and mutual respect rather than financial convenience or social expectations. Now, as I stood on the terrace watching another sunset, I reflected on how different my life had become. I was 62 years old, but I felt younger than I had in decades. I was financially secure in ways that went far beyond having money in the bank. I was secure in knowing who I was and what I valued. I was also, for the first time in 23 years, genuinely happy. My phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. "Dinner tomorrow? I found a new restaurant that looks terrible from the outside but supposedly has amazing food." I typed back quickly. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 7. As I walked back inside, past the portraits of my ancestors and through rooms filled with family history, I thought about the lesson my great-grandfather had written about so many years ago. Money really did reveal character rather than building it. Riley's character had been revealed by her assumption that she was entitled to wealth she'd never earned. Marcus's character had been revealed by his abandonment of Riley the moment he realized there was no money to be gained. But my own character had been revealed too. I'd learned that I was capable of patience, of strategic thinking, of protecting what mattered most even when it cost me emotionally. I'd learned that I could survive betrayal and humiliation and come out stronger on the other side. Most importantly, I'd learned that the wealth my family had built over generations wasn't just about money. It was about the freedom to be true to yourself, regardless of what others expected or demanded. That freedom, I realized, was worth more than anything Riley could have taken from me. For the first time in over 2 decades, I was exactly where I belonged, with people who valued me for who I really was, and that, more than any amount of money, was the real treasure I'd been protecting all along.